I'd been planning his birthday for weeks, not just picking up a cake and calling it a day, but really thinking it through, the way my mom taught me love was supposed to look. His favorite chocolate cake from that tiny bakery across town, the one that smells like warm sugar the second you walk in. A simple dinner at home, candles instead of harsh lights, soft music instead of TV noise. I even took the afternoon off work, which my boss hated, just so I could make everything perfect. Because in my head, he was the kind of man who deserved to be celebrated properly. On the way to the bakery, I caught myself smiling like a teenager. I kept thinking about how surprised he'd be if I showed up at his office with the cake and a little bow-tied box in my hands. I was picturing his coworkers teasing him, saying he was spoiled, and him pretending to be embarrassed. I'd blindfold him, drive us home, and he'd walk into a living room full of candles and his favorite food. It felt like one of those tiny promises I made to myself as a kid, watching my mom stretch every coin just to put a candle on a cheap supermarket cake. Love is shown in the details, she'd say, and I took that way too seriously. So there I was, driving with the cake on the passenger seat and the gift bag on the floor, humming along to some old song on the radio. Traffic was lighter than usual, and I remember thinking, for once, the universe is being kind. I decided, on a whim, to swing by his office a bit earlier, maybe wait for him in the parking lot. But when I turned down the usual street, I saw something that made my stomach dip. His car wasn't there. I frowned, checked the time, and told myself he probably left earlier, maybe went to grab a coffee. That's when I noticed his car again, just not where it was supposed to be. His car was parked near that old gas station on the corner, the one people only stop at when they're desperate. And behind it, tucked in a quiet little alley, were those motels everybody in town pretends not to notice. You know the type. Neon signs flickering, cheap doors painted over too many times, the smell of cigarette smoke even from the outside. I slowed the car without even realizing it, my fingers tightening around the steering wheel. Something in my chest twisted, like my body knew before my mind could catch up. Still, I kept telling myself there had to be some reasonable explanation. But then the door to one of the rooms opened and time just stopped. It wasn't dramatic like in the movies, no wind blowing, no thunder cracking. Just him, stepping out casually, like he'd just finished running an errand. He was laughing, head tilted slightly back, the same laugh he used when I made him dinner. And beside him walked a woman, brushing her hair with her fingers, adjusting her clothes in a way that burned into my brain. They looked comfortable, too comfortable. My heart didn't break all at once. It cracked slowly, like ice under too much weight. I didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't even move. I just sat there, parked behind a gas pump, watching the two of them walk to his car as if they were stepping out of a restaurant, not a motel room. He opened the door for her, something he rarely did for me, and she laughed at something he whispered. I felt this strange buzzing in my ears, like the world had gone underwater. The cake box slid across the seat when I jerked the car into reverse, but I barely even noticed. I drove off before they could see me, hands shaking so badly I had to grip the wheel with both just to keep the car straight. The afternoon sun looked different, harsher somehow, washing everything in this blinding light that made my eyes sting. I kept replaying the way he adjusted his shirt, the way she touched her hair, the stupid, careless ease of it all. The cake box thudded again when I took a sharp turn, its sweetness suddenly feeling like a joke I wasn't in on. I remember glancing at it and thinking how pathetic it looked sitting there, all dressed up for a man who had just walked out of a motel. It felt like every detail I had planned had turned into an insult. I didn't have a plan, not yet. I just drove, letting the road guide me because my mind was too foggy to trust. Every time I blinked, I saw them again, walking out together like it was the most natural thing in the world. A part of me wanted to pull over and scream until my throat tore open. Another part, the quieter, colder part, was already observing everything with the sharpness of someone waking up from a long, stupid dream. That part of me whispered, "Don't let him know you saw." By the time I reached home, my whole body felt hollow. I carried the cake inside like it weighed 100 pounds and set it on the counter without even looking at it. The candles were still in the drawer, the gift bag still neat, the dinner ingredients ready to be cooked, every symbol of love perfectly intact, except me. I stood there in the silence of the kitchen, feeling the air thick around me, my heart pounding like it wanted out of my chest. And in that moment, holding the edge of the counter to stay upright, I realized I didn't want the confrontation. Not yet. I wanted clarity and control. I woke up the next morning feeling like someone had scooped the inside of my chest out with a spoon. You know that strange heaviness that makes even breathing feel like a chore? That was me, standing barefoot in the kitchen, staring at the untouched cake like it was evidence from a crime scene. The smell of chocolate still hung in the air, and for a split second it almost fooled me, almost made me forget what I'd seen. But then the image slammed back into my mind. Him laughing, her adjusting her clothes, both of them stepping out of that motel room as if they owned the place. My hands started trembling again, but this time, not from heartbreak, something sharper. I made coffee because I needed something to do with my hands, something grounding. The sound of the machine was oddly comforting, like a tiny piece of normal life clinging to me. As the mug warmed my palms, I found myself replaying every moment from the past year, the late nights he had to work, the sudden shower he'd rushed to take, the times he accused me of overthinking. Funny how betrayal rearranges the past for you, turning memories you loved into clues you missed. Each one stung like a fresh slap. Still, I didn't cry. I felt too numb for that, too stunned for the luxury of tears. Around noon, I checked my phone and saw his usual text. "Morning, babe. Sorry I got home so late last night. Work's been brutal." He actually had the nerve to say that. Reading it made something inside me click into place, like a lock turning. I typed back a simple, "I know, it's okay," and hit send with a steady hand. Because if he thought I was clueless, I'd let him think that. For now. Silence, I realized, can cut sharper than screaming. The rest of the afternoon felt like walking underwater. I moved slowly, deliberately, as if any sudden motion might shatter whatever was left holding me together. I cleaned the kitchen even though it was already spotless, rearranging things that didn't need rearranging just to keep my hands busy. Every corner of that house held some memory of him, and each one felt like a splinter working its way deeper under my skin. But mixed in with the ache, something else began to simmer. This low, quiet anger that felt steadier than grief, like a flame that had finally stopped flickering and decided to burn. When he walked through the door that evening, he acted exactly like the man I thought I knew. He tossed his keys in the little bowl by the entrance, kissed me on the cheek with that rehearsed tenderness, and sighed dramatically. Said work was draining him, and that he wished he could just take a break. He didn't look tired, though, not the kind of tired you get from work. He looked nervous, the kind of nervous someone gets when they're juggling lies and hoping none of the plates fall. I watched him closely while he talked, pretending to be absorbed in folding laundry. Every word out of his mouth felt like a thread pulling tighter around his own neck, and the way he kept checking his phone, that was new. He angled the screen away from me, fingers tapping like he had ants under his skin. He told me he was going to shower before dinner. "To wash off the day," he said. I nodded, smiling like I couldn't see the guilt dripping off him. When the shower started running, I stood outside the bathroom door for a moment, listening. Not because I wanted to invade his privacy, but because I needed to hear the water, needed proof he was actually behind that door. Funny how betrayal turns the ordinary into suspicion. I could smell the steam creeping into the hallway, thick and warm, mixing with the faint scent of his cologne. The same cologne I'd once loved on him now made my stomach twist. Everything familiar had turned foreign overnight. I walked back to the kitchen and lit the birthday candles anyway. Not for him, for me. To see if I could stand there, in that room full of last night's broken plans, without falling apart. The soft glow reflected in the window, casting warm little halos across the counter, and for a moment I felt strangely steady. I set the table the same way I'd planned to, placing the wrapped gift in the center like some kind of cruel centerpiece. I wasn't celebrating him. I was studying him. He came out of the shower smelling like soap and lies, hair damp, face flushed from the heat. He smiled when he saw the candles, that practiced smile I'd seen 1,000 times. Said he felt bad for ruining his birthday night yesterday, swore he wished he could have come home earlier. I nodded, humming softly, as if his words didn't hit me like darts. But inside, something settled. Quiet, firm, unshakable. It wasn't the time to confront him. Not yet. Not when silence still had work to do. I didn't sleep that night, at least not in the way people call sleep. I lay there with my eyes closed, breathing softly so he'd think I was out, while my mind stitched pieces together faster than I could keep up. Every lie he'd ever told me replayed like a movie on loop. The late meetings, the dead phone battery, the sudden need for privacy he never had before. And as each memory resurfaced, it slid into place with sickening clarity, forming a picture I couldn't unsee. It wasn't one mistake. It was a pattern, a routine he'd been polishing behind my back. Around dawn, I slipped out of bed and padded into the living room, the floor cold under my feet. The house was still, that kind of early morning quiet where even the refrigerator hum feels too loud. I wrapped myself in a blanket and opened my laptop, hands trembling, not from fear, but from anticipation. I started with the credit card bill, scanning through purchases I'd never paid attention to. There it was, charges from cafes he never mentioned, late-night gas stations nowhere near his office, little payments that didn't fit the man he pretended to be. Each line felt like a breadcrumb leading me straight into the dark. Then came his car's mileage. Yes, I checked that too. He always bragged he was meticulous, and apparently he was right. He logged his mileage on a tiny notepad he kept in the glove box. I compared it to his supposed work schedule, and the numbers didn't lie. He hadn't been commuting to the office on half the days he claimed to. My stomach tightened, but not with heartbreak, more like resolve. Proof wasn't hard to find once I stopped protecting him with my own trust. It was all right there, hiding in plain sight. Next, I reached for his phone. Not recklessly, not angrily, but with the kind of calm you feel right before a storm hits. I already knew the passcode. He never bothered changing it because, according to him, trust was sacred. Ironic, right? The screen lit up, flooding my face with its cold glow, and for a second I just stared at it, breathing steadily, reminding myself I deserved the truth, no matter how ugly. And God, the truth didn't waste time showing up. The messages were all there. Late-night texts, inside jokes, little kisses hidden behind emojis, all neatly lined up like confessions. Her name was right at the top of the thread, a name I didn't recognize, but one I knew I'd never forget after that night. Scrolling through their conversation felt like digging through a grave. Each word a bone, each photo a piece of the body he'd buried behind my back. They talked about their meetings, their fun, their plans. He sent her selfies from the office bathroom, from his car, even from our living room on nights he claimed he was exhausted. Reading their messages felt surreal, like watching someone else's life shatter through a cracked mirror. Then I opened the photos. I don't know why I did it. Curiosity, masochism, closure, maybe all three. There they were. Motel rooms, cheap wine bottles, his hands on her waist, her lips on his neck. He wasn't just cheating. He was comfortable. At ease. Like betraying me had become a hobby he practiced on weekends. And the worst part? I didn't fall apart. A strange stillness washed over me, cooling my skin, slowing my heartbeat, like my body knew there was no point wasting tears anymore. By the time the sun started creeping through the blinds, I felt different. Lighter, in a twisted way. It was as if every lie he'd told had been sitting on my chest for months, and now, finally seeing them spelled out, the weight shifted from suffocating to clarifying. I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't doubting myself, or wondering if I was overthinking. No, everything was laid bare, undeniable, and brutally honest. Heartbreak had frozen into something steadier, something sharper. A calm clarity that told me, he's not the man you loved, he's just the mask you fell for. I sat on the edge of the couch, scrolling through the evidence again, not to torture myself, but to understand the full picture. Their conversations went back months, maybe even a year. There were days he told me he was training new staff, but really he was booking motel rooms. Nights he told me he was too tired, while he was out drinking with her. The more I read, the more I felt this strange sense of awakening, like someone had flipped on a light I didn't know I needed. I whispered to myself, no more excuses, no more protecting him. That's when the first outlines of my revenge started forming. Subtle at first, like fog on glass. I wasn't going to scream or break things or throw him out in some messy scene. No, that would have given him too much power, made him feel important in his own downfall. My mother always said, never raise your voice, raise your value. And for the first time in my life, those words didn't feel like advice. They felt like instruction. I knew exactly what I was going to do. I just had to wait for the right moment. I didn't let on that anything had changed. If anything, I acted softer, calmer, like a woman too in love to notice anything was wrong. It wasn't weakness, it was strategy. He'd grown so comfortable with his lies that he never imagined I'd sit across from him with a quiet storm building behind my eyes. That evening, I suggested we celebrate his birthday properly, since yesterday had been such a rush. He smiled, relieved, too relieved, and said he'd love a quiet night together. Perfect. The trap was already set. I made dinner the way he liked it. Pasta, garlic bread, a glass of red wine. The house smelled warm and familiar, a comforting disguise that soothed him into lowering every guard he had left. He sat at the table scrolling through his phone, smirking at messages he thought I didn't see. I watched him laugh under his breath, pretending I was just focused on stirring the sauce. But inside, my thoughts were sharp, precise, like someone slowly flipping through a folder of evidence. Every lie he'd ever told me had a timestamp now. When we finally sat down, he poured himself more wine and started talking about work. He said he had a big project coming up, and that he'd be home late a lot in the next few weeks. He said it so casually, so effortlessly, like it was the most normal thing in the world, and in third person, I repeated his own excuses back to him. He said he was staying late again, I murmured, still smiling. He swore he was exhausted. He laughed awkwardly, not catching on yet, thinking I was joking. But the way his eyes flickered, barely, told me his instincts were waking up. I let the silence stretch just long enough to make him shift in his seat. Then I looked at him, really looked, and said softly, he insisted nothing was happening. He swore I was imagining things. This time the words didn't come out like a joke. They came out steady, deliberate, like a mirror I was holding up for him to stare into. His hand froze halfway to his glass, and for the first time all night, he met my eyes. There it was, the flicker of fear, quick as a camera flash. He tried to laugh it off, of course, asked if I'd been watching some crime documentary again, said I always get paranoid after those shows. His voice cracked at the end, though, and he cleared his throat, trying to cover it. I leaned back in my chair, tilting my head just enough to study him the way he'd studied his lies, carefully, quietly. Then I set my phone on the table, screen down, and tapped it twice with my finger. He watched the motion like it was a loaded gun. He said he was loyal, I continued, almost whispering. He said he'd never hurt me. His face paled, real fear now, not the playful kind. He reached for his wine again, but his hand shook just enough for the glass to tremble against the table. That's when I turned the phone over, letting the screen light up with the very first message from her. Just his name on her lock screen notifications was enough. He stared at it like it was a ghost. He reached for the phone with this desperate, clumsy motion, but I slid it just out of reach with 2 fingers, calm, precise, like I'd practiced this moment in my head 100 times, which, honestly, I had. When he realized he couldn't grab it, his whole posture collapsed, shoulders slumped, eyes wide, lips parted as if words might fall out if he just breathed hard enough. But nothing came, not at first. Finally, he managed, "It's not what you think." The classic line. The one every cheating man seems to get issued at birth. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply turned the phone so he could see the screen clearly and began swiping through the photos, each one glowing like a tiny electric betrayal. I watched the blood drain from his face, watched his mouth tremble as if he could somehow talk his way out of pictures he'd willingly posed for. Then came the begging. He reached across the table, voice cracking as he said he never meant to hurt me. He said it was a stupid mistake, a phase. Nothing serious, as if reducing it made it less real. He even blamed work stress at one point, said all the long hours had made him lose himself. But I didn't flinch, didn't look away. I sat there, hands folded, letting him unravel in front of me, each excuse pulling another thread loose. And when he finally stopped talking, when he had nothing left but silence and shame, I leaned forward just a little. Just enough for him to understand the shift in power. Then I said the only true thing left between us. There will be consequences. You just don't know them yet. He didn't sleep that night. Not really. I heard him tossing beside me, breathing unevenly, sitting up, lying back down, whispering apologies into the dark like they were spells that might undo the truth. But I stayed still, eyes closed, letting him drown in everything he'd created. It was strange. I felt almost peaceful. Like the storm that had ripped through me days ago had finally emptied itself out, leaving behind a quiet, focused calm. Revenge doesn't come from rage. Mine came from clarity. By morning, he was a mess. Eyes red, hair tangled, pacing the kitchen while pretending to make coffee. He kept glancing at me, waiting for a reaction, a conversation, a breakdown, anything he could engage with. But I gave him nothing except a polite morning as I buttered my toast. His confusion grew with every second I refused to crumble. He asked if we could talk, wringing his hands like a guilty teenager caught sneaking in past curfew. I smiled faintly and told him I already had a plan for us. I let him believe us was still a possibility. Let him relax just enough for his shoulders to ease, let him think he still had space to negotiate. Then I asked him to meet me after work, said we needed to reset and rebuild, words he latched onto like a drowning man clutching driftwood. He agreed immediately, swore he'd be there early, promised he'd make everything right. I kissed his cheek before he left, not out of affection, but strategy, because by the end of that day, he wouldn't have a home to come back to. The moment he walked out the door, the house shifted. It felt bigger somehow, like it was finally exhaling after holding its breath for too long. I stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the couch where he'd sat scrolling through messages meant for another woman, and something inside me hardened with purpose. I grabbed a roll of trash bags from under the sink and started packing his things. Calmly, methodically, like I was sorting donations instead of dismantling a life. Shirts, shoes, chargers, cologne. All of it went into neat, emotionless piles. Every object felt lighter the moment it left my drawers. I didn't break anything. Not a plate, not a frame, not even the cheap ceramic mug he loved. Breaking things is for people who still want the other person to hear them. I didn't need him to hear me. I wanted him to feel the silence of consequences. So while I packed, I opened the windows and let fresh air in, clearing out the smell of him, the weight of him, the lies he dragged through every room. Sunlight pooled across the floor, and for the first time in months, the house didn't feel haunted. By noon, everything he owned sat in tidy bags lined up by the door. I even printed labels, clothes, toiletries, electronics, as if organizing his departure made it more civilized. Then I placed the envelope on top, the one with the printed screenshots, the dates, the motel charges, and a short note in my handwriting. This is why you're leaving. Not dramatic, not emotional, just factual. I left it there like a final signature on a contract he didn't know he'd signed the moment he cheated. When the time came to meet him, I didn't choose some quiet little restaurant. No, his consequences deserved an audience he couldn't manipulate. So I picked the cafe right across from his office, a place where his coworkers frequently stopped after work. I got there early, sat by the window with a cup of tea, and waited. My heartbeat stayed steady, my hands still. I felt like someone watching the final act of a play they already knew the ending of. He arrived exactly on time, hair combed, shirt tucked, eyes swollen from guilt and sleeplessness. He sat down quickly, leaning across the table like a man desperate to be forgiven before the conversation even starts. He launched right into promises, counseling, honesty, deleting numbers, quitting his job if he had to. His voice cracked, his hands shook, his eyes watered. But none of it pierced me. I just watched him unravel, sip by sip, like he was reciting lines from a script he'd practiced in the mirror. When he finally ran out of breath, I placed my house key on the table. Calm. Controlled. He blinked at it, confused, then terrified. I told him, in third person, that he'd been lying for months, that he'd insulted my intelligence, that he'd begged me not to ruin his life when he'd already been torching mine behind my back. His mouth opened and closed like he needed oxygen. Then I leaned in and said quietly, so only he could hear, "You don't live with me anymore. Your things are packed. The locks will be changed tonight." He didn't speak. He couldn't. The first night alone felt strange in the softest way, like stepping into a room I'd always lived in, but finally seeing it with the lights on. I slept in the middle of the bed, not pushed to the edge, not bracing for another lie disguised as a warm body beside me. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was gentle, almost reassuring, like the house was finally whispering, "You're safe now." When morning came, sunlight spilled across the floor in wide, warm stripes, and for once I didn't flinch awake. I stretched, slow and easy, letting my limbs take up space I'd been shrinking out of for years. Freedom felt quiet, but powerful. I made myself coffee, just a single mug, and the smell didn't feel bittersweet like it used to. It felt grounding. I leaned against the counter, sipping slowly, watching steam curl upward like a small, private celebration. No buzzing anxiety in my chest. No waiting for the sound of keys in the door. No rehearsing conversations in my head to make peace with someone who never deserved it. Just me, breathing, steady, whole. For the first time in a long time, the quiet didn't ache. Then, as I stood by the kitchen window, sunlight warming my skin, I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who planned birthday surprises with her whole heart, who believed love was something you proved with effort, patience, and little details. I loved her, truly. But she was gone now, replaced by a woman who understood something deeper. Betrayal doesn't define you unless you let it. And I wasn't going to let it. Not anymore, not ever again.